we know that they have different bedrooms, and slightly weirdly, that Donald Trump actually gave Melania the better bedroom. But then, that's what happens inside his bedroom. He insists on having carpet in the bathroom.
Carpet in the bathroom?
Carpet. The domestic staff have to deal with the fact the carpet is wet. That's not the only problem they have to deal with. The other problem is in his bedroom. And in his bedroom, they have to clean up because he leaves discarded detritus from his fast food habit on the floor. It includes what sounds like candy wrappers, it includes fast food wrappers. I mean, it sounds pretty awful.
I'm Joanna Coles. This is the Daily Beast podcast. We're recording on Juneteenth, a point when we're supposed to be reflecting, and yet we can't reflect from the reflecting pool because it's covered in algae. It's covered in algae. We'll be getting to that with our executive editor, Hugh Dougherty, plus the delicious new book out by Donald Trump, which tells us about his really revolting late night eating habits. Of course, Michael Wolff has often talked about those greasy hamburgers that the president likes in bed, but it turns out there's much more than that going on, and he just throws the stuff off the bed for the staff to collect. Well, the staff are having their own revenge and talking to Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan about, well, the president's domestic habits. And of course, Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister's response to Trump when he said she was begging for a selfie. Turns out, she really wasn't. Anyway, please subscribe if you haven't. This is our call to action to help support us as independent media. That's why we can bring you conversations like this without fear or favour. And, well, you subscribe. Let's get into it. Okay, I just really want to get into this book that reveals Donald Trump's nighttime habits, Hugh. This is Regime Change by Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan. It's the imperial presidency of Donald Trump. Tell me everything. Tell me everything.
Obviously, Jonathan Swan and Maggie Haberman are coming out on Tuesday with this book, and already lots of parts of it have been leaking out. And leaking more than the reflecting pool, in fact, maybe just as much. But some of the big reveals are about how Trump lives his life. And the most fascinating thing that I think so far is all about the White House bedroom arrangements. They have disclosed a real, I think, it's a real out. Now, we've always thought, and Michael Wolff has often said, that it's very clear that Donald Trump and Melania Trump do not sleep together. But now we know exactly how that arrangement goes down. We know that they have different bedrooms. And slightly weirdly, that Donald Trump actually gave Melania the better bedroom. It's very hard to know what's going on there. She is very rarely in Washington, D.C., but she gets a better bedroom. But then, that's what happens inside his bedroom. And as it turns out, it's not great. I want to take you back to a land and a town that we've all forgotten about, the 1970s, the 1980s. He insists on having carpet in the bathroom.
Carpet in the bathroom? Well, it's warmer having carpet. I understand people having carpet. It's warmer. I don't have one myself, but people do have carpet in the bathroom. Although you would think that the White House would be able to have underfloor heating.
So it's unclear quite why he wants carpet in the bathroom, but it's one of the big problems that the domestic staff in the White House residence, and that's that area above the centre of the White House. It's not an east wing that he knocked down, it's the bit above. The domestic staff have to deal with the fact the carpet is wet. That's not the only problem they have to deal with. The other problem is in his bedroom. And in his bedroom, they have to clean up because he leaves discarded detritus from his fast food habit on the floor. It includes what sounds like candy wrappers, it includes fast food wrappers. I mean, it sounds pretty awful. And you've got to say, if that's how if that is how the president is treating these incredible dedicated domestic staff, and we all know, we've all heard accounts about what goes on in the White House residence. There was that great movie, The Butler. These are people who have dedicated their lives to being there for the first families. And I think it's safe to guess that they've never seen such a thing before.
So Michael Wolff has often talked about the president eating hamburgers in bed. So I'm assuming that some of this comes from McDonald's. Maybe there's the odd Fisher fillet sandwich that he enjoys. I think I read in a Daily Beast story about this that they're also having to be very careful when they throw out the detritus of his midnight snacks, because sometimes there is actually White House sterling silver cutlery there.
We don't exactly know how they'd work this out, but now they have to go through every bit of trash and find if he's left the silver cutlery in it. I'll just take you back to the first Trump presidency, and a revelation there was also from a Maggie Haberman book, which was that they had to deal with an issue where he was tearing up official White House documents, throwing them in the trash, and they had a team which were dedicated to literally taping these back together to comply with the Presidential Records Act. This time, it's the silverware. Remember, the White House silverware, he didn't get it. They don't get it at IKEA like some of us. They don't go to Macy's. This is really, this is part of America. These are items that are part of American history, and they tossed on the floor, and it appears whether some accidentally actually loaded it out into the garbage, and we're in the landfill, we don't know. But what we do know is that they realised he was doing this, and they now have to search this garbage. So I think that people are going to say, well, this is very trivial. There's conflict in the Middle East. Gas prices remain high. Inflation is apparently incurable. The national debt that exceeds any levels that we've seen outside of war. All these things are trivial. But I just want to say, you really are dealing with an absolutely extraordinary insight into exactly how the president lives his life and how he treats the people closest to him. And I think that's something that everybody wants to know about.
Why do most sports bras miss the mark? They feel okay for workouts, but are a pain for all-day use, with straps digging into your shoulders, providing more discomfort than support. Those problems are a thing of the past with the Honeylove Cross-Flex Activity Bra. The Honeylove Cross-Flex Activity Bra feels like a sports bra, but it's actually designed for all-day wear. With its easy hook and eye back, you don't have to wrestle it over your head like most sports bras, and the wireless support using cloud fuse bonding means no poking, digging, or pressure points. Honeylove is an independent, female-founded brand with products designed by women who actually wear them. Honeylove doesn't just make bras and shapewear, they've built a full line of tanks, bodysuits and underwear with supportive structure, smoothing fabrics and premium finishes. Treat yourself to the most advanced bras and shapewear on the market. Use our exclusive link to save 20% off Honeylove at honeylove.com/dailybeast. That's honeylove.com/dailybeast. After you check out, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Experience the new standard in comfort and support with Honeylove.
So, Hugh, don't the White House staff sign NDAs when they're looking after the president? I mean, it's very unusual for this level of personal detail to come out about a president. I mean, there weren't books that came out revealing this kind of thing about the Obamas or the Bushes or the Bidens. And of course, we know that they had their enemies, but would Donald Trump actually be within his rights to feel, A, that these staff have been disloyal, and B, given how he loves to sue people, that actually they're infringing an NDA?
Well, yes, these are government employees. Some of them are actually members of the military. So, in principle, yes. I'll just point out there are dozens of White House staff. It's very difficult to sue dozens of people. We don't know who Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan's sources are. And we also know that the difficulty that Trump has here is that we know something of how the Obamas and how particularly, I think everybody will remember George H.W. Bush and and also George W. Bush's daughters, and the affection that the Bush family fought for and received from the people that looked after them in the residence. Particularly Jenna Bush has been real public about how when she's been able to go back occasionally to the White House, she has hugged, she has seen people that she had not seen in 20 odd years, she's hugged them, she's kissed them, she's felt such immense gratitude to them. George H.W. Bush, I think we'll all remember, there are pictures of him embracing these public servants, and the word is kind of elated because in many ways they are traditional servants in a big house. But this is kind of unprecedented. We've never heard bad things about first families. And I think the idea of picking trash off the floor and the sense of entitlement about it, the warped carpet in the bathroom, these are several things that are damaging to Donald Trump. And if he went to court, somebody somewhere has said something that breaks that agreement. He would have to work out who it was. And I don't know, how will people feel about somebody? These are not highly paid people. The majority of them are African American and always have been. The White House, and this is Juneteenth, the White House, of course, has a history that is covered by the nation's struggles with slavery. It's partly built by people who were enslaved, and then the racial makeup of Washington D.C. So there's a whole load of issues that this raises, and as I say, about how Trump treats the people right beside him. Those people who are there to look after him.
Okay, so what else do we learn about Melania Trump? We know that she doesn't apparently spend that much time in the White House. As I've said numerous times on this podcast, she makes it very clear at the end of her movie, Melania, the Amazon love fest for her, that at the end of Inauguration Day, which the movie leads up to, she makes it very clear that she and Donald Trump are going their own separate ways. So what do we learn about their arrangements? And is she more liked by the staff than he is?
It's interesting. Actually, we learn, I'll just be honest, from what we know so far from this book, and we've not read every page. I'm just say it's out on Tuesday. We haven't obtained every bit of it. We so far have a kind of a bit of a ghost. I think suggestive of Melania not being there very much. She is in what is called the master bedroom. He is in what is traditionally been called the living room. And in previous administrations, John F. Kennedy and Jackie, who the last presidential couple to have separate bedrooms, worth pointing out, the living room was where they would come together. And Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan posed in this living room because they used it as a living room. Trump has taken it over and made it into a bedroom. But there is very, very little mention that we know of Melania Trump. There's also a sort of strange detail about Melania and about how furniture that had been in the bedroom which she had, and these are the same bedrooms they had in his first presidency, some of this furniture moved into his bedroom, and she wasn't around. The other thing that we do learn is that she was very unhappy about the demolition of the East Wing, and that is pretty significant.
Oh, that's interesting. So she was unhappy about it. And of course, the East Wing is traditionally where the First Lady has her office. So did she complain about it? Did she protest to him? What do we know about her reaction to it?
Well, we know that there were two things she was unhappy with sequentially. And the first one was the Rose Garden. And the Rose Garden, of course, was created by Jackie Kennedy. It is, it was laid out by Bunny Mellon. It's one of the great symbols of the White House until Donald Trump paved it over. It turns out he wanted to pave over the whole lot. He wanted the roses gone as well. And the way that it's put by Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan, is that word came back from the First Lady's team that she was very unhappy, and there was a compromise, and the compromise was that the rose bushes got to stay. Now, similarly, when the East Wing demolition became known as a plan, word again came back that this was not going to make the First Lady happy, but it still went ahead. So I think there's a lot to digest about their marriage and their arrangement there, and a lot of questions about how did, like, this phrase I've used is word came back from the First Lady's team. Is that how they communicate? There's lots more to know.
There is lots more to know. Do we think that Donald Trump talked to Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan for this book? Because certainly they've talked on and off to him, as have many reporters. He calls people all the time. He loves being reported on. But sometimes people cooperate, and I always think, you and I both know this, with Princess Diana, who cooperated, told reporters everything, and then of course denied it frantically and said it was completely untrue.
I think we've got a new bit of transparency in the White House, apparently. Yes, he did speak to them. He spoke to them in March, which was at the end of this very long process that they'd gone through. They've spoken to, they say of 1,000 interviews, a deal of 1,000 people, or they spoke, to hundreds of people, and some of them 2 or 3 or 4 times. But in March, we finally spoke to him. They went into the Oval Office, and again, we don't know everything of this book, but we know a lot of it. It's quite an extraordinary scene, because they walk into the Oval Office, and what they find is him sitting surrounded by gold, obviously, and he's looking at pictures. It's mid-March, he's at war with Iran. He's looking at pictures of maple trees, because he says he's ordering some more trees for the White House. So it's a scene that tells you a lot, I think, about this president who's determined to magnify the White House. He's monologuing it. And we were, I've said we at the Daily Beast, even in our comments, people are saying, why are we focusing on this trivia? Well, maybe it is trivia, but we're focusing on what the president is focusing on, and he's the most powerful man in the world, and he's the one looking at printouts of maple trees. The other things that he was looking at was a printout that claimed that he had 339 billion TikTok views. Who knows how this was counted? Who knows even came up with this number? But there it was. And we did, though, you know, at the end that both of them interviewed him. Clearly, I think there might be more quotes coming in this book. It's 400 odd pages, but I think some of it was off the record, some of it was fact checking, some of it was then putting things to him. And on the way out, I'm just going to warn, there's some bad language, I'm not going to use the worst of it. He has had a complicated relationship in public with Maggie Haberman. He speaks to her, he has spoken to her regularly over the years. They go back many, many years. She was a New York Post reporter, that is his favourite newspaper. And he has nicknamed her Maggot Haberman in public. At the same time, many people watching this, I know we're going to see in the comments, people feel that she has been an avenue for him to brainwash and an avenue for him to get his views across. Anyway, on the way out the door, I'm just going to have to glance down to get this quote right. He says, "Our many book will be critical, but remember this, people are tired of your bull-fuss always criticising. I'm tired of winning and winning and winning and just getting bad effing press. It's about time that you tell the truth." So there's certainly been an interview, there's certainly been access, and I think even he knows that what's in this book is bad, bad, bad. And some of the other, and I'm not going to say that these are necessarily more insightful, but they certainly, I think, are more significant to many people. The idea that there was a crisis discussion about how to hide the Epstein files that took place on the Situation Room, and it might have been taped, that is an absolute bombshell. And we've used this word, we've called it a bombshell book, because that is an absolute bombshell. The Situation Room being taped, the Epstein files being covered up, an active plot to do that. These are things that people are going to look at, in the swathe of history, but also in November and say, oh my God, what is going on in the White House? How can this be a serious presidency? And meanwhile, he's all doing maple trees.
And of course, all the gold decoration and the filigree that he loves so much in the Oval Office. There's an anecdote in the book, I think, where Carolyn Levitt comes in, the press spokesperson, and she's astonished to find Donald Trump super gluing some filigree to the wall. And this is just, this is part and parcel of how he decorates it.
And it's a tiny correction there, because what absolutely factual at the Daily Beast, it was to the mantle of the Oval Office fireplace. So
the mantle, not the wall, the mantle.
Not the wall, the mantle. I'm not a DIYer. I'm left-handed. I don't do those things well. Every super glue I've ever done involves one, like my two fingers being stuck together there, and then it goes somewhere. And I just the idea that the most powerful man in the world, and I keep saying this, the most powerful man in the world is spending his time flicking through catalogues of maple trees, going up to the mantle and going, oh, do you know what? I've got a little bit of gold and super gluing it on. It's extraordinary. I mean, I'm just stating the obvious here, but FDR wasn't doing that in 1942.
No, and I mean, actually what's fascinating too, because we've done our own reporting around Trump's manic truth socialing, is that obviously a lot of his truth social posts can probably be sort of timed by his snacking. So we know, because Michael Wolff has talked about his obsession with ice cream, that he loves to have a tub of ice cream, that Michael talks about going to his house in Hollywood and Trump tossing him a carton of Haagen-Dazs. So we know that he eats fast food in bed, he eats sugar in bed, and then we can see the outcome of it, which is these manic posts. And of course, if you're eating, tubs of ice cream, if you're mainlining Starbucks sugary snacks, you're not going to get much sleep.
No, I mean, we all know that sugar highs. It's like, one thing I should say is that there's a leading question, which a number of people have raised, and we don't know the answer because we don't have the text. The leak of the book has suggested that he has Starbucks wrappers on the floor of the bedroom. A lot of people suggested it might be Starburst. We are waiting to see the text. We're waiting to see if there's going to be any corrections, really make clear what it is. But whatever it is, it's loaded with sugar. You shouldn't be eating sugar late at night. We all know that. And we all know, with the evidence of road eyes, that Donald Trump is not a healthy man. He's 80. He shows vigor. We can't argue about that, but he shows decline. And anybody who is aging, and I'm aware of this, and at any stage after the age of 22, you don't feel good eating sugar at night. It's this extraordinary manic burst of Truth Social coming night after night, or on Air Force One, which I really want to talk about. You're right, it must match up to these sugar rushes and this rush of salty food that anybody would be told by their physician not to do.
Well, and it's slightly addict's behavior. I mean, we're always told that Donald Trump's older brother, Mary Trump's father, and obviously we've had Mary Trump many times on the podcast. She's a friend of the Daily Beast, and she has remarkable sort of observations about him because she's a clinical psychologist. But she talks a lot about her father having been an alcoholic, that Donald Trump refused to touch alcohol. He says he doesn't touch it. And yet we know that he's so passionate about Diet Coke that he actually has a button on the Resolute desk that he presses to get Diet Coke whenever he needs it. And this is kind of addict's behavior. Late at night, a pint of ice cream, lots of wrappers around yourself. Either that, or it slightly reminds me of the fashion world, where people used to take a lot of Ambien when we were flying back and forth to the shows in Europe, and models and fashion editors who had disordered eating would report that they had taken 2 Ambien, woken up, and they were smeared with Snickers wrappers from the minibar because they sort of, behaved weirdly. So I wonder if it's possible he occasionally takes sleeping pills and then wakes up and he's eating all this stuff. I mean, who knows? But it's odd behavior for a president.
There are the very serious health rules going on this week, I should say, Joanna, because what we saw this week when he was in Albion-Vauban for the G7 summit, that there are a number of pictures of his hands, and they show marks on his hands. They include a cut on the back, I believe, of his left hand, sort of like there. And they also show on his left thumb a pinprick pattern, which is incredibly similar to that which people who have diabetes are used to doing when they check their blood sugar. And we have asked the White House, what is this mark about? Is he being monitored for diabetes, for pre-diabetes? We have had no answer. So you're right, we don't know if he's on Ambien. We don't know if he's getting monitored for diabetes. And we're asking relentlessly. And these are very serious questions. And in fact, the White House physician, Sean Barbarella, has said that they are not necessarily obligated to disclose everything that is going on. So here we go. Ambien, something similar. This pattern of behaviour is actually a serious question worth asking. And again, I think goes back to the seriousness and importance of these revelations in this book.
Okay, so we know that something also is going very wrong with the reflecting pool. It's Juneteenth, a time for reflection, yet the one thing that isn't allowing anybody to do any reflecting, because it's covered in thick green algae, and we've all seen the pictures. It's not American flag blue. It is a disgusting kind of syrupy, green, moldy water that I don't think anybody wants to look at. So, Hugh, can you just remind us?
I think I've put it my board, boy.
Well, how did we get here, Hugh? Because I think everybody, I mean, previous presidents have wrestled with the fact that the pool does leak, and yet it's one of the most classic, beautiful, calm places in DC to have a stroll. And as its purpose says, to reflect on whatever ails us, whatever troubles us.
Well, right. I mean, yes, I think everybody who's been to DC has almost inevitably walked along the pool and thought, what a great, what a great place of peace, a piece of calm. Usually you're walking towards the Lincoln Memorial. Sometimes you're going the other direction towards the very large World War II memorial, and both of them are, fantastic pieces of architecture. This reflecting pool has long been troubled by algae. I'm just saying, since it started, or since it started being filled when it was built in the 1920s, and it's often, there's been a number of schemes to try to deal with this, and the most recent one was a pretty elaborate, or I'll say the most recent one before Trump, was a very elaborate new drainage system that would, in theory, clean the water consistently for this algae. It didn't quite work as well as it should have, and people acknowledged that. Trump, however, saw this as something that was to blamed on Joe Biden and Barack Obama and George W. Bush. I'm not sure he knows other presidents to blame, but they're the ones. Because the reflecting pool, of course, is owned by the federal government. It's a responsibility of the Department of the Interior. So he blamed his predecessors for these new systems that had been installed that haven't quite worked. And of course, what does he do? Well, he owns a lot of swimming pools, particularly in Mar-a-Lago, and he said, I'm the expert, I'm the only one that can sort it out. He got in, and this is where the story goes from green slime to real slime. He said that it would only cost a couple of million. It has now cost $18 million.
18. So it's 9 times more expensive than he said it was going to be.
It is, yes. And also saying that we know of, and the contracts were given out without bids. And I'm just going to go on a completely colourful, and I literally mean this story, which will make people groom with rage. One of these bids was given to a felon, a man who'd been convicted of felony counts of bribing a congressman. And the picture that you're about to see on screen of this man, John Cafaro, has caused hilarity to everybody who sees it. There have been comparisons between him and Fat Tony from The Simpsons, to somebody who kidnapped Orphan Annie. There's been all those comparisons, but this guy, he runs a company called Groom Water Services. And do you know what? He delivered, because the water is very green. He got 1.8 million. How could he possibly get into this? Well, we don't really know, because it's a no-bid contract and it's shrouded in secrecy. But let me just run through some of the things we know about him. He's a Trump dooder. He's got a house near Mar-a-Lago, and Donald Trump says he is, quotes, a fantastic man. Story about the 5 days he spent in jail for trying to make an illegal donation to his daughter. I'm sorry for the large fine he paid for bribing a notorious congressional crook called Jim Trafficant, a man who, by the way, has the weirdly elaborate hair, which turned out to be a hairpiece, and is often seen as a predecessor politically to Trump. But, buddy, this guy was the perfect guy with his green water services to sort out the reflecting pool.
So what happens now? We know it's supposed to be American flag blue. It's supposed to be perfect for July the 4th, because it's obviously not perfect for Juneteenth. Is it possible it's going to be fixed?
I mean, everything is possible, Joanna. The way that we saw them trying to fix it this week was pouring in gallon bottles of bleach, such that you and I probably have under the sink and can certainly get at our local Ace Hardware. They were pouring them individually in by hand. And perhaps the most devastating outcome, I'll just remind you, among the things that Donald Trump has called the water there filthy and disgusting, he promised on June the 4th, that it was full of clean, beautiful water. There's 6.75 million gallons in there. Unfortunately, there's now been analysis, which I'll credit the Washington Post for this. They got a researcher at the UVU, at University of Virginia, to use satellite imagery that goes back 5 years, and it shows there's more algae than ever before. So,
wow.
Can it be fixed? Maybe. I'm not sure that pouring individual gallon bottles of unbranded bleach is the woe. And as you say, the clock is ticking to July the 4th. Realistically, 2 weeks, it's 2 weeks and 1 day to July the 4th. It doesn't look like it. It seems to be going up, not down.
Well, and of course, we remember Donald Trump has a thing about bleach. Remember when he just wished that we could get rid of COVID by spraying bleach at each other, into our veins, all of it. He's obviously got a thing about bleach. So, Hugh, of course, this is made all the more fascinating this week. The UFC fight, the strolling around Versailles, where he's obviously getting more and more ideas for his ballroom, the book about his unseemly, let's say, bedroom habits, scarfing all sorts of fast food and leaving the wrappers everywhere. And I'm assuming he's sort of sleeping in the wrappers, or perhaps he throws them off the bed, like Henry VIII sort of ate his chicken bones and turkey legs and threw them over his shoulder for people to collect. But the judge...
Can I just correct a small, or just because you're so factual at the Daily Beast? Henry VIII, in reality, didn't have access to Turkey because it hadn't been brought back from what is now the United States at the time.
Alternative facts, as Kellyanne Conway would say. Anyway, he's eating chicken legs then, but he eats his chicken leg and then throws them over his shoulder. And of course, poor people come and collect them. And actually, I've been in England for the last week or so, as you know, and actually, the comparisons with Henry VIII and Donald Trump seem more and more similar, actually, creating his own church, getting rid of his wives when he's had enough of them. The whole thing, actually, you suddenly realize there are these characters in history that crop up that have just completely outsized power and use their power in an outsized way. So, of course, the juxtaposition this week that I think everybody is seeing is the opening of the Obama Library yesterday, the hilarious speech that Michelle Obama gave with several digs directly at Donald Trump, an enormous amount of applause when she references Barack Obama's Nobel Peace Prize, of course, the one thing that Donald Trump has been craving since he's got in second time round, but also the fact that the previous living presidents are all there. So Joe Biden was there with Jill, the Bushes, George W. Bush and Laura were there, the Clintons were there. So I can't help but think Donald Trump, especially given, I mean, at least according to Anthony Scaramucci, he knows what a bad deal he's ended up striking with Iran. Whether or not he's feeling utterly paranoid that these people are all sitting around discussing him, laughing at him, or whether or not he thinks they are envious of him because he's now wielding global power.
I'll just go back to some of the revelations from this book because they're fresh, but these are things that Michael Wolff has been saying to you for so many months, so for more than months, for all the time that he's been part of the Daily Beast family on Inside Trump's Head. One of the revelatory moments in the book is Trump turns to Howard Lutnick, his most reliable sycophant, and he says to him very abusively, "What happened to you, Howard? You used to be a killer. You were 35. Now we've got your beautiful wife. Now you're just a P word," the words that Trump we know uses regularly, the grab and buy word. And the thing is, as Michael Wolff has often pointed out, his lizard brain, and Anthony Scaramucci said similar, he knows there is no way that watching, and that's what he does, he watches television, watching this incredible number of people with the Obamas to open their library, all the living ex-presidents. The presence of George W. Bush is, of course, a rebuke to Donald Trump. Donald Trump was smirking at this appalling insult that was levelled by Michelle Obama at his tacky UFC fight on the South Lawn, when this Josh Holkin stood up and said, and this is vile, but it has to be said, Michelle Obama is a man. And Trump smirked. His White House didn't condemn it. He's never condemned it. George W. Bush went, and we know that George W. Bush and Michelle are friends. He went straight to Michelle and hugged her. You can't get any stronger of a rebuke than that. Trump is watching. He knows how this plays. He knows that the A-list were all there. Even people that the Trump lot have kind of thought mobile could be sympathetic. Bo Chappelle, the comedian, was there. He's been incredibly controversial on trans issues. He was there, and he said it was a great moment of history. So this moral Trump isn't hurting. And the contrast was so...
And the contrast of the singers too, because of course Donald Trump had wanted there to be a big concert, and I think it was Rick Grenell who'd previously been in charge of the Kennedy Center.
They're unemployed.
And I was going to say now happily back to its actual name, the John F. Kennedy Center, not the Donald Trump Kennedy Center. Their attempts to put on a concert to celebrate Donald Trump's birthday just completely fell apart. Martina McBride, even Milli Vanilli pulling out because they didn't want to be a part of it because it had been hijacked by MAGA. And yet you have at the Obama Library, you have Stevie Wonder, you have Bruce Springsteen, you have American classic artists. They don't get bigger than that. So that must also feel like a rebuke.
The sense of rebuke was out there for every second of it. His name was ever mentioned, and what does Donald Trump hate most of all? Not being in the conversation. And the vision that Obama set out for his library was very, very pointed. He said it would acknowledge his mistakes and shortfallings. He also spoke about the beauty and the challenges of democracy. He spoke in language that, let's just be honest, this is a register unknown to Donald Trump. And he was cheered, he was applauded, he was hugged, he posed with, all the first families, and the contrast to the UFC event was absolutely blatant. And there's one one particular guest that I think is going to cause raised eyebrows, at least around if there's a Trump family dinner table. I can't really envisage it because he'd be in the bedroom, right, eating off the floor. But in the Trump family group chat, Ivanka's sister-in-law was there, and she spoke about what a great day it was for America.
So you're talking
Ivanka's
about
sister-in-law,
the supermodel Carly Kloss, who's a friend of mine, I should just say, and who's married to Josh Kushner, who is Jared Kushner's brother. He has an enormous private equity fund called, or venture capital fund, Thrive Capital.
what a symbol, first of all, of a divided country, that you have this member of a family. The rest of this family, I would just say her husband Josh tries to say to people that he's not political. Just not a phrase that we should be using these days. Look what happens in 8 Bargatze. But her husband says he stays away from politics. But her father-in-law, Charles Kushner, a felon pardoned by Trump, who became his ambassador to Paris. His sister-in-law, Ivanka Trump, they're in UFC. Her brother-in-law, Jared Kushner, negotiating peace in the Middle East and Ukraine. No comment on the results. And there she was. So I think the sense of the closeness of this rebuke to the Trump family machine is going to be felt by them. I just go back to my point. They know that this looked great. They know that whatever your views are on the architecture, and I know, Joanna, you're not a huge fan of the Obama Presidential Library building, but whatever your views on that, you saw a united front of absolute A-listers in one place for one purpose. And that's something Donald Trump has never managed to do.
Well, and you also had former First Lady and Michelle Obama giving her husband a rousing speech, which I guess you could argue Melania did in Trump 1, but at Trump 2, he looked incredulous when she turned up and smiled at him during the RNC. I mean, nobody expected her to come. She showed up, she didn't say anything, and she wouldn't sit with him in the box at the RNC. I'm expecting you to correct me on that. You looked as if you had your Daily Beast fact checker, Joanna's exaggerating, but I'm pretty sure that's right? He wasn't expecting her to turn up at the RNC.
Oh my God.
She did,
No,
because it was
very
just
well known.
after. Right. And it was just after the shooting at Butler, Pennsylvania, so it would have looked really hard-hearted if she hadn't shown up.
The way that you could see that the Obamas are a joint enterprise, if you like, that Michelle was there to speak in support of her husband. And I'll just say that they also did an interview on ABC News, and they sat together. I'm not sure, have we ever seen Melania and Donald Trump sitting together for an interview while he's been president? I'm not sure we have. But they sat together, and Robin Roberts asked Michelle, what's next for you? What's your next era going to be about? And she said, me. And I can't imagine Melania Trump saying that to Donald Trump. And I certainly can't imagine that she would laugh and that Donald Trump would laugh and put his hand on his wife's hand and be not just approving, but supportive and part of this journey. The contrast in these couples is extraordinary.
Well, there's also a contrast with Trump's version of being at the G7 summit this week and spending time with Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy. He says that she was desperate to talk to him, that she insisted on having selfies. Incredibly unusual. Giorgia Meloni actually decided to respond to the president and say, this is completely untrue. I wasn't demanding a selfie. And why are you so much more pleasant to China and to Russia than you are to your allies? It makes sense. It makes no sense. Why do you do this? Which is actually one of the first times that people have challenged him on this and his sort of nonsense. And he also sort of behaved as if he gave her an audience and she should be incredibly grateful for it. Instead of acknowledging that she is an ally, she's part of the European Union, part of NATO, and that we're allies.
So I just want to quote the words of Giorgia Meloni, at least translated from Italian. I do not speak Italian. There is one thing to remember, she said. Neither I nor Italy ever beg.
That's right, because he said she begged him for a selfie.
Begged. She begged him to take a photo of her. She wanted it so badly. Like, I think there's a sort of sexualized element to this, rather clearly in his language and obviously how he approaches women. But this is also a reflection of Donald Trump's view of power and how power rests with him. And what we saw this week at this G7 in France was actually this power didn't really look too much like his. This was not the only bad moment of human interaction that suggests that Trump and power in the world, on the world stage, are really not as closely united as he would think. The other great moment was that he walked in an hour late to the main session of the 7 leaders who are there. And around this table, you've got Mark Carney, you've got Giorgia Meloni, you've got Emmanuel Macron, who I'm sure we're going to discuss in a second.
And who is the host? And who's the host? Because this is all taking place in Evian in the south of France. And Mark Carney, of course, the Canadian Prime Minister.
And the Keith Starmer, the United Kingdom's Prime Minister, who is there as well. And while sitting around, Scott Bessent, of all people, has sat himself in the president's chair. J.D. Vance wasn't there. He was promoting his book on The View. But Scott Bessent was sitting in the chair. Trump walked in, and I think in the mind he swaggered, but he walked in, kind of lumbered in behind the South Korean delegation who were sending in, I don't know, an interpreter or something. And he walked in and he walked a bit and he went, "I'm the boss." And there was laughter. Because it's not clear after this Iran mess, after the clear difficulties that he has dealing with Russia and, Ukraine and his trip to China that got him nothing. It's not clear, frankly, that he is the boss, and therefore there was laughter. And then this weird quote that he gave to an Italian newspaper or Italian news channel that was published on Friday morning about her begging for a photo, was immediately responded to by Giorgia Meloni. People are pushing back. They've slummed upon our rising. And that's not something that we have seen on a world stage. How does he react? We'll wait and see.
But we're also beginning to see it at home too, partly with Republicans who are now leaving, either because they've been primaried, like John Cornyn, or Tom Tillis, who's leaving. And of course, these people could have grown a spine before. It's much easier doing it at the door on your way out. But nevertheless, there is certainly a feeling, I think, among certain Republicans that they've got a large enough group of resistors that they can begin to push back. Hugh, it's so interesting talking to you. I'm thrilled that we've managed to catch up. And when we speak next week, I really hope that we can dig down into the Republicans who are beginning to resist Trump now and say, enough already, you're going to be a lame duck.
I think this is a few days where we are going to see an accretion of this sentiment inside the Republican Party. This Iran deal, and I'm just like, we could do a podcast series unpacking. Is it a deal? But
it's a memo of understanding. It's a memorandum of understanding, but nobody understands what's in it. And the Iranians just laughing, saying he's the worst deal maker in the world.
The war may not be right. Let's not judge that. But what we can say is that people like Ted Cruz are not happy. People who have been vehemently opposed to any help, assistance, aid to the Iranian regime are saying it appears they're going to get $300 billion. It appears they get to keep some nuclear material. It appears they get to keep their missiles. These are problems for people, as I said, Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, and these Republicans that you mentioned that are leaving anyway. They begin to be nicknamed the YOLO, You Only Live Once caucus, because they can stop this. This sentiment is going to rise. Rupert Murdoch, the incredibly influential media mogul, even at Monty Fowler, remains a very powerful voice on this particular issue, on Iran, on foreign relations. The Wall Street Journal, which is read heavily by these old-fashioned establishment Republicans, in something that it has in its opinion pages been really, really critical of Donald Trump. It's used words like surrender. So I think the next few days you're going to see an accretion of this. And Trump has been pushing back. He's, and he has literally said to people, "I'm the president and you're not." That's his response.
This is his new catchphrase, right? I am the president,
this is
you're
his
not.
new
So when people
catchphrase.
criticize this,
Yes.
and I wonder if this has a knock-on effect on Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance, who, as you say, is now out promoting his book. Who knew we would be in this position?
Well, I think from the speaking next week, it's going to be clear what is whether the Republican Party at large or the MAGA movement at large has swallowed this deal and gone along with Donald Trump's assessment, this crazy assessment this week that he is more powerful than Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin and Chairman Mao and many others, and said, sounds good to me. We're going to see if they've gone along with that and was more powerful, and he's made them swallow this memorandum of understanding, which appears to be crumbling even as we speak, or whether they say, hold on, we've got elections coming up in November, in 2 years' time. We've got a presidential race coming up. Every senator looks in the mirror and says, hello, Mr. President. Ted Cruz absolutely making moves. Marco Rubio appears to have been anointed by Trump. J.D. Vance clearly thinks he might have been anointed by Trump. You get a lot of anointing when you're Catholic, but that one, that's not official. And there's 100 senators. Maybe out of that Republican caucus, there are 4 or 5 people who are plausible candidates. Josh Hawley is a very plausible candidate. So Tom Cotton, a very plausible candidate. So we're going to have to decide, what do I do about this? Where do I go on this? And am I going to say, yes, you're more powerful than Hitler and that's a good thing? Or am I going to say, okay, stop. Let's Iran thing's bad. And once they do that, they stop resisting. Well, it's going to be not just torn up candy wrappers on the floor of the bedroom. Is going to be things thrown at the walls in anger, because the reaction that Trump is going to have to that is going to be fascinating.
Wow. Okay, well, Hugh, let's get back together again at the end of next week for further catch up and track what's happening. But it does feel that it's all beginning to fall apart, that it's all cracking open, and Trump's domination of the Republican Party certainly seems to be faltering.
It's one algal bloom that appears not to be blooming right now. Donald Trump's power.
And no reflecting in the reflecting pool. Hughie, thank you very much. I know you have a newsroom to run. Thank you, and I will look forward to seeing you. Well, I won't be back for another week or so, but I will look forward to seeing you in person when I do, but I think we'll be seeing each other before then. On the Daily Beast podcast.
Joanna, it's my pleasure.
I always love talking to Hugh Dougherty. He's so knowledgeable. He knows everything going on and he reads everything. You can never find a story that Hugh hasn't already read and knows much more about. Anyway, if you have been, thank you for joining us. Big shout out to our production team working on The Holiday. Ryan Murray, John Romero, Rachel Passer, Heather Passaro, and Neil Rosenhaus. So the good news is we have so many B-Beast tier members now. There are too many names to read out, and we really appreciate your support.